This was a tough one to put together into a somewhat comprehensible episode, but let's start from the beginning and just drudge through the drudgery. Alright, so early last spring, in late March if I'm not mistaken, I was at my grandparents' house hanging out, and me and my amazing then 92-year-old granddad started talking about my newish appreciation for vintage camera gear. Moments later, as we're going through some of his drawers in search for whatever it was, I spotted an old camera just lying there. Visibly happy about my fascination for what turned out to be his late mother's old Agfa Isolette II, he let me borrow it indefinitely and my excitement just shot through the roof. A few days later, I got some 120 film at a local camera shop in the city, one roll of HP5 and one Portra 160, because that was basically all I could find during the great film stock shortage of yesteryear. Or something. It's still going on, but whatever. Now, firing off these first couple of rolls happened somewhat sporadically, and I didn't really make an effort to get footage of the process. Except for the odd frame here and there, which is pretty much what I'm basing this entire episode on. Using this camera was also a little intimidating at first, before I got the hang of it. It shoots square photos, and you get 12 shots out of a roll, unless you screw it up. Not that I know anything about that. Luckily, it still had the plastic take-up spool still inside it after probably decades of not being used. It also took some time fiddling around with the dials, buttons, and levers to figure out how to actually use the damn thing mechanically. Also, I'm using the TD Artisan external light meter to get a correct exposure. Soon enough, probably only a week or two after having it in my possession, I was confident enough to put the first roll of HP5 in it, and I brought it to my mom's place when me and Emma were in her neck of the woods. I shot this first ever photo from her balcony, and I think it turned out quite nicely. Första. Focus to infinity, 1/300th of a second at f, somewhere between 11 and 16. First photo ever with this camera. Okay, need to cock the shutter. I've darkened the black slightly in post, and from what I've heard, HP5 really comes to life when pushed to stop or two, so next time I'll definitely do that. This time the pictures were a bit washed out, but it didn't really matter as there turned out to be other, bigger problems, as you'll start to see in this next selfie of me and Emma, as well as many of the shots following. Selfie time. So yeah, the problem should be pretty obvious by now. And no, the issue was not due to my own inability to focus correctly. There are no focus assist tools in this viewfinder, so you have only the markings around the front element to go on, paired with judging focus based on visually trying to estimate distance. And I mean, an arm's length of just under 1 meter really isn't that difficult to nail, but the focus plane is obviously far behind us in this shot. So something definitely seems to be wrong with the focus mechanism of the camera. At least when it comes to close focus of under a few meters, as you'll soon bear witness to, sadly. First 2 shots fired. Whee. After that, we headed over to my grandparents who live nearby. It was the week before Easter and springtime was in the air, but everything was still gray and nasty looking, so shooting black and white seemed like the right choice. Coincidentally. I thought it would be fitting to shoot a couple of frames of this first roll at their place, since, well, quite obviously since that's this particular camera's home. I was thinking about maybe blurring out their faces too, for privacy reasons, but the camera was kind enough to do that for me, along with everything else around them. Except for the background, which could either be seen as a deliberate, interesting, creative decision, or, you know, complete I might lean towards the latter. Seriously though, these photos of my grandparents, as well as my mom, being out of focus is really quite unfortunate. Having good photos of them at this age, in their home, taken by my granddad's old camera would have been really special. It only seems to be a problem with large apertures though, while at the same time focusing at close distances, as you can clearly see in this shot taken from their balcony. Here almost everything is in focus, so I guess a much faster film stock push to stop or two could potentially work. But these days it's really expensive to experiment, so I haven't really gotten around to trying it yet. But I might. I probably will. Anywho, I had a few shots left on the roll, so a couple of days later I decided to head into the city to drop them off at Odin Lab for development, while finding a good spot to fill up the remaining empties on the way there. I got on the bus, awkwardly trying to film myself with as much stealth and confidence as I could muster up, with varying results. Proud of my newly discovered silent vlogging skills, I then jumped on the train and got off at Stockholm Central to see if I could snap a few bangers around City Hall.
Nästa, Stockholm City.
Having got off at Stockholm Central Station, I made my way towards City Hall on foot, which isn't far. Stockholm is pretty damn small for being a capital city, but quite nice if viewed from the right angle and in the right light, figuratively speaking. I stopped in this spot right here to take a photo from the other side of this bridge. It's not great, but at least it's mostly in focus. Moving on, I walked around the building and out onto this not-so-hidden spot between the outer wall and the waterfront. That's really quite nice and secluded, and not many people seem to be able to find it, or care to go there. But it made for a great spot for filming myself while I failed to make the last two photos of the roll turn out at least half decent. Yeah, I somehow managed to do a partial double exposure here. And I wish I had a tighter lens to cut out most of that sky and water, but it is what it is. I then turn around to get this shot of the tower in the corner of the building. I really don't understand how I could get motion blur in this shot when shooting straight up into the bright sky with a 400 ISO film. My guess is I stopped it down too much to make sure I got everything in focus and set the shutter speed too slow to compensate, but I honestly don't know. Keep in mind that at this point I hadn't seen a single photo coming out of this camera yet, so I was happily unaware of its focusing issues. Although I knew that it was an experimental batch, as with all rolls put through any film camera for the first time. It's just very unfortunate that mistakes here tend to be expensive ones. Being a really nice spring day, I took the time to sit down for a bit in the sun while spooling up the film, making it ready for the lab. Don't ask me how, but I somehow managed to botch focus here too. It's quite ridiculous if you think about it. Although, if I remember correctly, I used the better cameras on the back of my phone as opposed to the low quality selfie one on the front, which meant I couldn't see the screen while filming. But isn't that a nice pin-sharp pattern in the fabric of my pants? Glorious. I walked back to Central, got on another train and rode one stop to Odenplan where the lab is located. Dropped the roll off along with a few 135 films I'd shot recently and headed back home. Well, not straight home obviously. I had to stop by our precious government-controlled alcohol monopoly Systembolaget to get some more beers first. On the way there I walked past a shopping cart in a ditch and found it to be pretty damn cool looking. Sadly, I didn't have a camera loaded with film anymore, so this epic cinematic B-roll segment will have to suffice. Heading home. Got some beers. Life is good. And by the way, yep, that's right. You can't get any alcohol above something like 4% in the regular supermarkets here. For proper beer, wine and spirits, you have to go to Systembolaget, which has plenty of shops and agents spread out across the country. There are definitely pros and cons, but they tend to carry a pretty huge variety and at very low prices compared to bars and restaurants, so personally I like them. Downsides mainly being opening hours in that they close early on Saturdays, are closed completely every Sunday so you have to plan ahead, and they don't refrigerate anything. So unless you like your sporadic 11 AM on a weekday beers at room temperature, keep a stock fridge at all times. Anyway, remember back in the second episode of this film photo walk series, where me and Emma walked around our snowy neighborhood and ended up in a graveyard for sunrise? Well, that was actually only 3 days before this. But in that time the scenery had changed quite dramatically, and I couldn't be happier, because I really can't stand the snow. Only a couple of days ago, this is where me and Emma went to take some photos, and it was covered in snow. Now look at it. These next 11 shots are from the second roll of film I put in the Isolette. Yes, for some reason it only rendered 11 frames, most likely due to user error. This time they're in color, shot on Kodak Portra 160 as mentioned in the beginning of the video. I didn't capture any B-roll or on-location A-roll at all with this film stock, so I'll just run through the images pretty quickly here before we're done for the episode. The first pictures were once again fired off at my grandparents' place during the first days of May last year on my grandmother's 92nd birthday. Now, given that this roll is less than half the speed of the 400 ASA Ilford HP5 that I used last time, I had to open up the aperture even wider to compensate, making it much harder to nail focus with the seemingly faulty mechanism in this camera. It's really a shame that the photos turned out the way they did, because the colors coming off of this film stock are just amazing. Oh well. This next one is strange. It looks pretty good at first sight, but when examined closer, something weird happens. Sure, it's shot through the window next to the balcony of my mom's apartment, so a very similar frame to the very first photo of this episode. Shooting through things can definitely distort the image, but if you look closely at the greenish building in the center, it looks decently sharp. Then if you look at the balconies to the right, they're very sharp. But the yellow house in between them is very soft and out of focus. Since this goes against the laws of physics, it's more likely caused by the window it's shot through. But it's a brand new building with very high quality glass windows, so it's still strange. Anyway, I still like the photo. It's nothing special really, but the colors are vibrant, the leading lines are intriguing, and it's not too poorly compositioned. At least not compared to what we've seen so far in the episode. This one is probably and quite randomly my favorite from all the photos I've taken with this camera though. Sure, I probably could have spent an extra 2 seconds framing it up slightly better, as well as underexposed it slightly to bring out some detail in the sky, but the colors, shadows, textures, and empty street leading into the frame makes it pretty cool. Way to go me. These few shots were taken on a stroll around the neighborhood not far from where I grew up. Possibly on the same day as the last few photos, but could also have been a week or two after. I really can't remember, and it doesn't matter. Sadly, the focus problem makes itself known again in this shot of my mother and Emma. In the next photo, I once again managed to nail focus somehow, which seems to be a bit of a guessing game at this point. But I really like it, and it's probably my second favorite of all. Maybe even better than the last one I mentioned, but with fewer colors and an even more overexposed sky. I don't know, they're both good. The composition of this one is a little boring and also a bit strange, as I'm pretty sure I set focus to infinity to get the church in the middle of the frame nice and sharp, which it is, but so are the bushes and house in the foreground, but not Emma walking down the sidewalk in the bottom right corner. The last couple of photos are from visiting my dad and stepmom with Emma, my sister, and her husband. In the first one, focus is okay, and the colors are really nice and vibrant too. In the second and last one, of my dad, same thing. Not 100%, but definitely good enough to keep for my personal family collection. So there you have them. All the photos from the first 2 rolls I put through the Agfa Isolette II. To be honest, I haven't touched it since then, other than playing around with it at home, but without it being loaded with anything. I really want to shoot it more, but before I risk messing up more expensive film stocks, I need to figure out what's wrong with it and how to compensate in order to nail focus going forward. And that itself is going to cost me at least 1 roll of overpriced 120 film plus developing and scanning, so we'll see when that happens. This was the last weird episode before starting to have some structure again, so from the next episode on, it'll be a lot easier to follow along. The hype is real. I'll see you then.